What is up, all my beautiful dolly friends? I'm Dr. Doll, and welcome to another video. So, I was recently gifted these gorgeous custom sparkly pink eyes from Dallas Doll Co. I was given them for free, probably because I buy so much from their website as a thank you gift, and I was just playing around with them and trying to come up with an idea, a plan on how to utilize them. And it got me to thinking about how difficult it is to use pink eyes in a way that is not creepy. I don't know if any of you have ever seen customs with like very unnatural or creepy looking eyes, but it's an interesting phenomenon that occurs. Sometimes you see unnatural eyes on a doll and it looks really cute or really cool, and sometimes you see like unnatural colors on a doll and on a doll's eyes, and it's very off-putting. Sometimes it's even creepy, sometimes it's scaring, and it's scary, and words fail me. But it's this phenomenon that it happens a lot in the doll world, and it's something that goes back to what's known as the Uncanny Valley. And if you look behind me, I have made this very like rudimentary little like board for us to talk about, and it's really silly. I feel like I'm in elementary school again. But if you've ever heard about the Uncanny Valley, it's this phenomenon that occurs where the closer something gets to looking human, it goes up to where it's like it gets cuter, it gets cuter, and then right before you hit an object that looks like a human or looks like hyper realistic, you drop down into what's called the Uncanny Valley, where all of a sudden we're very scared of the object, we're very off put by it, and we want nothing to do with it. And this was a phenomenon that was first identified by a robotics professor in 1970. His name was Masahiro Mori. He called it the Bukimi no Tani Gensho. And that, I don't know exactly what that like literally translates into English, but this term was translated loosely into Uncanny Valley by the author Jasia Reichardt in her book Robotics, Fact, Fiction, and Prediction. And it was as she was bringing attention to the discoveries of Professor Mori from the 70s. So this is an interesting phenomenon that occurs where we as humans are very off-put by things that look human or look humanoid, but there's something off about them. There's something that we can't quite put our finger on. There's something just a little bit off. There are really smart like AI robotics out. I think like Sophia is one of them that people find very, very creepy. And it's because of this phenomenon with the Uncanny Valley where something that is almost human but not quite, people are scared of, people are off put by. And I've printed out two examples from the doll world that we can use to describe this phenomenon. So I will take this off actually and show you. So both of these dollies have the same exact eyes. They're both primrose pink. So if you look at the picture, sorry, my printer is not the best, but if you look at the picture in this, you see the dolly has light pink eyes matched with light pink hair. And overall, aesthetically, I would say the majority of people would say that this dolly Looks very cute. It's very pleasing to the eyes. Now take those same exact eyes in a different setting with a different wig, and all of a sudden we have a doll that's kind of creepy, kind of off-putting. We don't feel as comfortable with it. There's something about it that makes us feel uncomfortable. And that's because this dolly here has managed to stay on this side of the Uncanny Valley. It has not tried to cross over into the realistic or hyper-realistic side, whereas this one has just enough that it is dipped us down here into the scary dolls category. Why is this important in the doll world? Well, anytime you're dealing with objects that resemble humans in any way, robots and dolls are probably the biggest, most common examples. You're going to experience this phenomenon. There's a lot of criticism about the Uncanny Valley theory, mostly because the threshold for where the valley starts and ends is different for each person. And that's because the Uncanny Valley is defined as a heterogeneous grouping phenomenon. I know that's a big term, but a heterogeneous grouping phenomenon means that the Uncanny Valley itself is incredibly diverse. It's dependent upon an individual's cultural, societal, and religious background, and it involves different sense modalities and can have multiple overlapping or inexplicable causes. So in other words, the individual, who you are, what your background is, has a lot to do with where the valley begins and ends. That's why some people find all dolls creepy, right? Their threshold is much farther back. If they see any doll, anything that resembles a human, they immediately are off put by it and they think that that item is creepy. Whereas someone like me who works with dolls, my threshold is much farther up. I can look at many dolls and appreciate their beauty and appreciate their craftsmanship without thinking that they're creepy. So everyone, based on their background, based on their experiences and their beliefs, their threshold is different. And that's why it's a very difficult phenomenon to pin down, like in a scientific and solid way, because it's so fluid. But that's what I find fascinating about it is it's one of those things that everyone has. Everyone has a threshold of, okay, that's creepy. But it's finding, okay, where are the majority of people? Where does it begin and end for the majority of the populace? And so that's kind of where we come back to these eyes here. I have a couple of theories on dolls and the Uncanny Valley and how to avoid hitting the Uncanny Valley. Your goal as a doll maker, as a custom maker, is to stay on either side of it. So you can either stay over here where you have perhaps more fantasy style dolls that aren't hyper realistic. You wouldn't see them in the real world. They fall more on this side, or you can go over the valley to the hyper realistic dolls. This is where you start getting into the reborn baby dolls, dolls that are very, very human-like, very, very lifelike. They have come on the other side of the valley. So you want to be, as someone who makes dolls, as someone who does customs, you want to be on either side, ideally as close to the valley as possible on either side without falling in, because that's where you're going to hit the majority of your audience. So I find all of that incredibly fascinating. I don't know if you do. But it's something that you need to keep in mind if you're going to be doing customs. You will see a lot of unnatural eye colors for sale out there. Pink is probably the more popular one. I will tell you that the Uncanny Valley is it's a lot more difficult to hit with eye colors that appear naturally. So if people have that color of eye, so blue, green, brown, violet. Violet is one that it can live in both worlds. It can live in the hyper-realistic world, or it can live in the fantasy world. Those are all fine and good. Now, eyes like this that people don't have, pink, yellow, orange, those are colors that are more difficult to pull off without falling into the valley. So I'm going to give you my theory on why pink eyes are difficult, and also kind of try to help you if you really want to use a fantasy color eye like pink, how you can make it work and avoid falling into the valley. So my theory is that because these are unnatural, they are not a naturally occurring color that happens in humans, they automatically are on this side. So if you pair it with a wig, I have a brown wig here. If you pair it with a wig that is a naturally occurring color in the world around us, then you run the risk of it looking creepy. And my theory for why that is because you're taking eyes that are on this side and hair that are on this side. And so naturally, you're going to fall in the middle. So I would personally avoid, I have no science to back this up. This is just my opinion, by the way. So I would personally avoid, if you're going to do a fantasy color, or a color that doesn't occur naturally, I would avoid using natural hair colors. I would instead focus your attention on staying on the unrealistic side of the valley. So I have here, this is Majestic Magenta, I think, or Magenta Majesty, one of the two. So we're going to try this wig and see what we think of it. And then obviously, beauty is always in the eye of the beholder. So if you are a person that you like the natural hair with the fantasy eyes, then do it by all means. I'm trying to speak about what is going to hit the broadest, the biggest audience. Okay, so here we have our fantasy eyes with our fantasy hair. And I don't know about you, but to me, it looks a lot less threatening right away. And again, I come back to my theory of we have fantasy eyes, which are over here, so we need to match it with unrealistic hair color in order to avoid the valley. And so this is what I would do. I would match it with an unrealistic or an unnatural hair color, something that's not naturally occurring. And also, because pink eyes people have made comments that they look like they're red or they're piercing, and in our society, at least in Western society, red eyes, even though, when they happen in the real world, it's usually a sign that person has albinism. Because of, our background culturally in Western culture, we tend to associate red eyes with evil. So people really don't like the idea of red eyes. I think red eyes are cool, but whatever. So in order to have it pull less red, I would avoid using contrasting colors. If you are going to use pink eyes, I would use complementary colors, colors that surround pink on the color wheel. So, for instance, I would avoid pairing it with green, yellow. I would try and match pink eyes more with purples, pinks, reds, colors that fall more on the same side of the color wheel. If you're going to use orange eyes, try to stay within the orange family, reds, yellows, oranges, because if you want something to stand out more, you will use a contrasting color, just like if you have brown eyes like me and you want them to pop, you're going to use blue eyeshadow because it's the opposite. It's going to make the brown stand out more. So if you want the pink eyes to stand out more, then you would use a green wig. I think that aesthetically that isn't great. I would go for complementary colors, colors that are in the same family, in the same color palette. If you're using orange eyes, the same. If you're using yellow eyes, personally, I think yellow eyes are the hardest to pull off without looking creepy. But my advice is if you're going to use fantasy eyes, then do the whole doll in a very sort of fantasy way, if that makes sense, just to avoid pushing it towards, you want to stay on this side of the valley. You don't want to be going towards realism, because as soon as you do start to go towards realism, that's when people get a little bit creeped out. So that's just my 2 cents. You know, I find the idea of the Uncanny Valley very fascinating. If you're someone that works with human-like objects at all, then it's something that you have at least thought about. It's interesting that I didn't know, but apparently, like, people who design characters for video games or movies, they also have to study this phenomenon so that the characters are likable, and that we as an audience, when we're playing a game or watching a movie, don't feel creeped out by them. So it's a really interesting, it's a very important phenomenon, and it's very widely studied. There's tons of different ideas behind it and why it exists, and why we feel off put by things that are like not quite human. And I think the most common idea or hypothesis is that it's going back to the fight or flight response, our response, where if something doesn't feel right, or something feels off about something, then we feel like, okay, this is not good. We need to, for our own survival and protection, we need to stay away from it. So it's sort of a survival mechanism. At least that's my belief. But I find it all incredibly fascinating. And I thought that having these pink eyes was the perfect opportunity to open up the floor for discussion about the valley. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and comments on this. Have you ever had to think about this in your day-to-day life, in your work? Is this something that's ever been brought up? What do you think? Please let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And please consider subscribing also. That's a good thing. So I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit, and we will see you in the next video. She can't wave right now, so I'll wave for her. Bye, guys.